The massive chamber of the Galactic Council shook with voices raised in panic and disbelief. Delegates from hundreds of worlds argued, shouted, and demanded answers as the emergency transmission replayed on the central holographic display for the third time. Nobody could believe what they were seeing. The Zelthian Empire was asking for help. The Zelthian Empire. These were the same brutal warriors who had conquered 17 star systems through sheer military might. They were the species that made entire civilizations surrender just by showing up at their borders. For centuries, they had been the undisputed military superpower of the Outer Rim territories. Other species whispered their name with fear and respect. And now they were begging the Council for assistance. Commander Velkara stood apart from the chaos, her large eyes fixed on the holographic images floating before her. She belonged to the Mothari species, known throughout the galaxy for their calm wisdom and diplomatic skills. Her people had negotiated peace treaties for over 1,000 years. She had personally witnessed wars end with words instead of weapons. But what she was seeing now made even her composed nature waver. The images showed 3 complete Zelthian battle fleets. Each fleet contained dozens of massive warships, bristling with weapons that could level cities from orbit. Together, these 3 fleets represented over 200 of the most advanced combat vessels in known space. Their combined firepower could reduce planets to ash. And yet, the holographic display showed nothing but debris. Twisted metal floating in the void. Broken hulls spinning slowly through space. Emergency beacons crying out from escape pods scattered across light years of empty darkness. 200 warships. Gone. Destroyed. Annihilated. The attacker? One single ship. A human ship. Counselor Thexmon rose from his seat, his reptilian features contorted with confusion and anger. His scales rippled with colors that indicated extreme distress in his species. "This makes no sense whatsoever," he declared, his voice booming across the chamber. "One ship cannot possibly accomplish this kind of destruction. It violates every principle of space combat we understand. The Zelthians must be lying or exaggerating the situation." Velkara turned to face him, her voice remaining calm despite the turmoil around her. "The evidence sits right before our eyes, Counselor. The debris patterns match Zelthian hull signatures. The emergency beacons are broadcasting authentic Zelthian distress codes. Their survivors are transmitting battlefield recordings. This actually happened." She had made it her personal mission to study humanity ever since their first contact with the galactic community 3 years earlier. They were newcomers to the vast network of civilizations that spanned the galaxy. A young species, barely having left their home star system when they encountered their first alien life. Initial reports painted them as aggressive and dangerous, prone to violence and conflict. Their own history supported this assessment. Humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other in countless wars. Yet Velkara had discovered something interesting during her research. Humans were aggressive, yes. But they also showed remarkable restraint when given the choice. They had developed complex rules about warfare. They created international laws even when fighting each other. They had weapons capable of destroying their entire world but chose not to use them. This combination of deadly capability and voluntary restraint fascinated her. Until now, humans had been cooperative with the Council. They attended meetings. They followed protocols. They negotiated trade agreements and cultural exchanges like any other civilized species. But something had clearly changed. Something had pushed them past the point of restraint. The council chamber gradually quieted as the representatives realized the magnitude of the situation. After hours of debate, they voted to send an intermediary. Someone had to make contact with this human warship before things escalated further. Velkara volunteered immediately. If anyone could establish peaceful dialogue, her diplomatic experience made her the logical choice. Her diplomatic cruiser was a beautiful vessel, designed for comfort and communication rather than combat. It carried advanced sensor arrays, translation systems, and communication equipment. Weapons? None. The Mothari believed that diplomacy required showing trust first. As her ship glided through space toward the human warship's last known coordinates, Velkara reviewed everything she knew about human vessels. They were relatively new designs, incorporating technology that often surprised more established species. Humans had a talent for creative problem-solving that led to unconventional solutions. But what her sensors were showing her now went beyond unconventional. It was impossible. The human vessel, designated UHSN Relentless according to the identification transponder, was phasing in and out of normal space. It flickered on her sensors like a candle flame in the wind. One moment it existed in regular three-dimensional space. The next moment it seemed to slip sideways into some other dimension entirely. This technology shouldn't exist. The physics required to accomplish this were theoretical at best, considered impossible by most galactic scientists. Velkara felt genuine fear for the first time in decades. She had negotiated with warlords, pirates, and militant empires without feeling this level of dread. But watching that ship phase through reality itself made her understand that humans were far more advanced than anyone had realized. She opened a communication channel, hoping her translation systems would work properly. Human vessel, this is Ambassador Velkara of the Galactic Council. I come in peace and request immediate dialogue to prevent further conflict. Static filled the channel for several long seconds. Then a woman's voice responded, clear and sharp as a blade cutting through silk. The translator rendered it in perfectly calm tones, but Velkara could hear the underlying steel beneath those words. This is Captain Rebecca Hayes of the United Human Space Navy vessel Relentless. I appreciate the gesture, Ambassador, but we have no interest in council mediation at this time. The Zelthians took our people from their homes. Now we're taking them back. It's really that simple. Velkara chose her next words carefully. Captain Hayes, please. Violence breeds more violence. Let us negotiate a peaceful resolution. The Council has resources and authority to help retrieve your people through proper diplomatic channels. The response came back even colder than before. With respect, Ambassador, the time for negotiation ended when Zelthian warships appeared in orbit above New Haven Colony. It ended when they landed troops and rounded up 3,000 civilians like animals. Men, women, and children taken from their homes in the middle of the night. Enslaved. And your council? You formed a committee to study the situation. You scheduled meetings. You filed reports. Captain Hayes paused, and Velkara could hear someone speaking quietly in the background of the transmission. Then the captain continued. We don't have time for committees anymore, Ambassador. Stand aside. We don't want to hurt anyone who isn't directly involved in what happened. But we will not stop until our people come home. Velkara's sensor display suddenly flared with new data. The Relentless was changing course, its trajectory now aimed directly at the heart of Zelthian territory. The ship accelerated to speeds that shouldn't be possible for a vessel of its size. Horror filled Velkara as she realized what was happening. The Council's greatest fear, the nightmare scenario they had discussed in private sessions, was becoming reality right before her eyes. Humanity wasn't following the established rules anymore. They weren't filing formal protests or requesting arbitration. They weren't asking permission or seeking approval from the galactic community. They were simply acting, taking matters into their own hands, delivering their own form of justice whether the galaxy approved or not. And if one human ship could destroy 3 Zelthian fleets, what would happen when humanity truly went to war? Fleet Commander Rathzul stood on the bridge of his flagship, gazing at the tactical display with deep satisfaction. The holographic projection showed every single vessel under his command positioned perfectly throughout the Crimson Nebula. 347 warships. The entire 7th Armada. Each one was a masterpiece of Zelthian military engineering, bristling with plasma cannons and missile batteries that had conquered countless worlds. The Crimson Nebula was the perfect location for an ambush. Dense clouds of ionized gas stretched for millions of kilometers in every direction, glowing with a dull red light that gave the region its name. These gas clouds interfered with most scanning technology, creating natural blind spots that his fleet could hide within. Rathzul had positioned his ships in a massive sphere formation, completely surrounding the path the human vessel would take. When the Relentless entered the center of this trap, his entire armada would fire simultaneously from all directions. There would be no escape, no clever maneuvering, just overwhelming firepower from every possible angle. His tactical officer leaned closer to the display, his mandibles clicking with excitement. The sound echoed slightly in the quiet bridge as other crew members focused on their stations. They must be complete fools to approach alone, the officer hissed, his voice carrying the distinctive rasp of the Zelthian language. One single ship against an entire armada. What kind of arrogance drives them forward? Rathzul nodded slowly, his own mandibles spreading in what passed for a smile among his people. Pride, he agreed, his tone dripping with contempt. They destroyed a few of our patrol fleets and now they believe themselves invincible. They think that early success makes them unstoppable. We will teach them a harsh lesson about the price of arrogance. We will show them what real military power looks like. He had spent 30 cycles commanding Zelthian forces. 30 cycles of victories across dozens of star systems. He had seen every trick, every tactic, every clever strategy that species throughout the galaxy could devise. Nothing surprised him anymore. And certainly nothing about these upstart humans would change that. They were newcomers who had gotten lucky a few times. Now their luck was about to run out in the most spectacular way possible. The sensors suddenly chimed. The Relentless had entered the outer edges of the nebula, moving at high speed directly toward the center of his formation. Rathzul felt his blood pumping faster with anticipation. The human ship seemed completely unaware of the trap waiting ahead. Perfect. He watched the Relentless penetrate deeper into the nebula. The vessel was smaller than he expected, maybe a third the size of his flagship. Its design looked strange to Zelthian eyes, all smooth curves and unusual angles rather than the aggressive spikes and armor plates that dominated their own ship architecture. But size didn't matter when you were outnumbered 300 to 1. All ships, Rathzul commanded, his voice carrying across the fleet communication network. Weapons free. Fire at will. The entire armada opened fire as one. Plasma bolts screamed through the nebula from every direction. Missiles streaked toward their target, leaving trails of brilliant light through the red gas clouds. Energy beams capable of melting through solid steel lanced through space. The combined firepower of 347 warships converged on that single human vessel. It was enough destructive energy to crack a small moon in half. Enough to vaporize a space station in seconds. More than enough to obliterate one ship regardless of how advanced its technology might be. Rathzul leaned forward, expecting to see the Relentless attempt desperate evasive maneuvers. He anticipated watching their shields light up under the assault, then fail, then the hull rupturing as the ship died. But what happened next made absolutely no sense. The Relentless didn't dodge. It didn't even raise defensive shields. Instead, the entire hull suddenly split open in dozens of places. Sections of armor plating peeled back like flower petals opening to the sun. And from within those openings poured out thousands upon thousands of small objects. They scattered into the nebula like a metallic cloud, spreading in all directions faster than his eyes could follow. Within seconds, every sensor system on his flagship went completely haywire. The display that had shown 347 friendly contacts now showed thousands of new signatures. Tens of thousands. Each one moving independently. Each one changing direction with impossible agility. The tactical computer tried to track them all and simply couldn't keep up with the sheer volume of targets. What in the name of the ancestors are those things? Rathzul demanded, his voice rising with the first hint of concern. Get me detailed scans immediately. His answer came not from his crew but from the battle itself. The first wave of those small objects reached his outer ships. They weren't missiles. They weren't fighters with pilots inside. They were something else entirely. Autonomous drones, each one maybe the size of a ground transport vehicle, moving with mechanical precision. The initial impact reports came flooding in. These drones weren't just attacking randomly. They were learning. Actually learning and adapting in real time. The first few drones that hit Zelthian shields tested them, probed them, analyzed them. Then they transmitted that data to every other drone in the swarm. Within moments, the entire cloud of machines knew exactly where the weak points existed in Zelthian shield technology. The drones concentrated their attacks on those precise weak spots. Shield generators overloaded. Defensive systems failed. And once a ship's shields collapsed, the drones swarmed over the hull like insects, finding weapon ports and engine exhausts and other vulnerable points. They didn't need massive firepower. They just needed to hit exactly the right places. All ships, implement defensive pattern 7. Rathzul ordered, his claws gripping the edge of his command console. Pattern 7 was a complex rotating shield configuration that constantly changed frequencies and coverage areas. It was specifically designed to counter adaptive weapons. His ships had drilled on this pattern hundreds of times. The formation shifted. Shields recalibrated. For maybe 10 seconds it seemed to work. The drones appeared confused by the new configuration. Then they adapted again. Faster this time. The machines analyzed the new shield patterns, shared the data across their network and adjusted their attack vectors. The entire process took less than 15 seconds from start to finish. 15 seconds to completely counter a defensive strategy that had taken Zelthian military scientists decades to develop. They're everywhere, his weapons officer shouted, abandoning all protocol in his panic. We can't target them all. There are too many and they move too fast. Rathzul watched in growing horror as his beautiful formation disintegrated into chaos. Ships broke formation trying to escape the swarms. They collided with each other in the dense nebula. Some tried to jump to faster-than-light speed but couldn't generate stable warp fields while the drones tore into their engine sections. The entire armada, the pride of the Zelthian military, was being systematically dismantled by machines that worked together like a single vast organism. Captain Rebecca Hayes's voice suddenly came over the emergency channel, broadcasting on all frequencies so every ship in the armada could hear her words clearly. The translator rendered her words in perfect Zelthian, but the cold fury in her tone needed no translation. "Your people came to New Haven Colony in the middle of the night," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos of battle like a knife. "They landed troops and rounded up civilians. Mothers cooking dinner for their families. Fathers coming home from work. Children playing in the streets. You took them all. You put them in chains. You made them slaves. Did you honestly think we wouldn't respond to that? Did you really believe we would just file a complaint with the Galactic Council and hope for the best?" Rathzul wanted to respond, to justify his people's actions, to explain that they were just following orders from the Imperial High Command. But his voice caught in his throat as another wave of explosions rippled across his fleet. Ships that had survived 100 battles were dying around him. Vessels commanded by warriors he had known for decades were going silent one by one. He watched in numb disbelief as half his entire fleet died in the first hour of combat. Over 170 warships reduced to floating debris. And through it all, the Relentless itself never fired a single weapon. It just hung there in space, its hull still open like a blooming flower, directing its swarm of mechanical death with clinical precision. One of his younger officers, barely old enough to have earned his command stripes, screamed across the bridge. "They don't fight with honor. This isn't warfare. This is extermination." Rathzul found himself laughing. It was a bitter, broken sound that surprised even him. "No," he said quietly as his flagship shuddered under another series of impacts. "They don't fight for honor. They fight to win. And there's a very important difference between those two things." His tactical display showed the situation deteriorating by the second. The drones were now targeting command ships specifically, going after the vessels with the most communication equipment and the most command personnel. They were cutting off his ability to coordinate what remained of his fleet. These machines weren't just winning. They were ensuring the Zelthians learned absolutely nothing useful from this battle. The flagship lurched violently as multiple drones penetrated the hull. Emergency systems screamed warnings. Life support in 3 sections failed. The engineering deck reported core containment dropping rapidly. Rathzul knew his ship had minutes at most before complete structural failure. He opened one final communication channel to his homeworld, broadcasting on the emergency military frequency that would reach the Imperial Command directly. His last transmission, his final warning to his people about what they truly faced. "Run," he said simply, his voice hoarse. "Forget about pride. Forget about honor. Just run. The humans don't fight like warriors. They don't fight like any species we've ever encountered. They fight like they're solving a mathematical problem. And right now we're the problem they're solving." The flagship's reactor containment failed. The last thing Fleet Commander Rathzul saw was a brilliant white light filling his vision as 300 years of Zelthian military tradition died with him in the depths of the Crimson Nebula. Ambassador Velkara walked slowly to the center of the Galactic Council chamber, her footsteps echoing in the enormous space. She carried a data device in her hand, its small size belying the explosive information it contained. Behind her, a massive holographic display flickered to life, filling the air above the assembled delegates with documents, communication logs and financial records. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Not the comfortable silence of thoughtful contemplation, but the heavy, oppressive silence that comes when people realize something terrible is about to be revealed. Hundreds of representatives from dozens of worlds sat frozen in their seats, their various eyes, optical sensors and sensory organs focused entirely on the Mothari diplomat standing before them. Velkara had spent the last 2 weeks investigating the attack on New Haven Colony. What she discovered had shaken her faith in the very institution she had served faithfully for decades. The Galactic Council, the organization that supposedly maintained peace and justice across thousands of star systems, was built on a foundation that suddenly seemed far more fragile than she had ever imagined. "The raid on New Haven was not a random act of violence," she began, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Every word was measured and deliberate. It was not the result of Zelthian expansionism or their usual territorial aggression. It was commissioned, planned, paid for. She gestured at the holographic display, and a series of financial transactions appeared, glowing in the air for everyone to see. 3 council members secretly hired the Zelthian Empire to acquire human technology and human civilians for study. Bargonia wanted access to human artificial intelligence systems. Thex Prime sought samples of human genetic material for their biological research programs. Velthor desired human spacecraft propulsion designs. The chamber remained deathly quiet, but Velkara could see the subtle reactions rippling through the assembled delegates. Some leaned forward with sudden interest. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few looked genuinely shocked, while others wore expressions that suggested they had suspected something like this all along. Councillor Thexmon suddenly rose from his elevated seat, his massive form towering over the other delegates. His scales flushed dark purple with anger, and his voice boomed across the chamber with all the authority of someone who had held power for many years. These accusations are completely unfounded and documented. Velkara interrupted him calmly, not raising her voice but somehow projecting even more authority than his shouting. She had never interrupted a sitting councillor before in her entire career. The breach of protocol sent a clear message about how serious this situation truly was. I found the payment records. Multiple transfers of credits from council discretionary accounts to Zelthian military procurement channels. The transactions were routed through 17 different intermediary banks to hide their origin, but I traced every single one. More holographic displays appeared, showing communication logs this time. Encrypted messages between council officials and Zelthian military commanders. Negotiations about targets and timing. Discussions about which human technologies were most valuable. Orders specifying that civilians should be taken alive and unharmed for study purposes. The Zelthians didn't raid New Haven because they wanted slaves for their empire, Velkara continued, her voice growing harder with each word. They did it because council members paid them in gold, credits, and trade concessions. You wanted human technology but were too afraid to negotiate directly with humanity, so you hired someone else to steal it for you. And when humans demanded justice, you formed committees and scheduled meetings while pretending to be neutral mediators. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates leaped to their feet shouting accusations and denials. Some demanded immediate sanctions against the implicated council members. Others screamed that this was all fabricated evidence designed to undermine council authority. Security officers moved forward nervously, unsure whether they should restore order or simply stay out of the way of the political firestorm. But Velkara noticed something important. When she looked directly at the delegates from Bargonia, Thex Prime, and Velthor, she saw the truth written plainly across their faces. It wasn't shame or remorse. It was fear. Pure, undiluted terror. They weren't afraid of sanctions or criminal prosecution or even being expelled from the council. They were afraid of what humanity would do when they learned the complete truth about what had been done to their people. While the council chamber descended into political chaos, something far more immediate and dangerous was unfolding many light years away. The Relentless had completed its journey across space and now hung in orbit above the Zelthian homeworld. The planet rotated slowly beneath the human warship, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Captain Rebecca Hayes sat in her command chair on the bridge of the Relentless, staring at the view screen that showed the world below. It was actually a beautiful planet from orbit. Swirling white clouds drifted across blue oceans. Vast continents covered in green vegetation stretched from pole to pole. Cities glittered like jewels across the night side, their lights twinkling in familiar patterns that reminded her of Earth viewed from space. 8 billion Zelthians lived down there. 8 billion individual lives, each one unique and irreplaceable. Families gathering for evening meals. Children playing games in streets and parks. Workers heading home after long days. Artists creating beauty. Scientists pursuing knowledge. People living their lives, completely innocent of the crimes their government had committed in their name. Lieutenant Jack Morrison, her tactical officer, stood at his station nearby. He was young for his rank, barely 30 years old, but had proven himself capable during every engagement they had fought. His hands moved across the control interfaces with practiced efficiency as he brought all the ship's weapon systems online. "Ma'am, we're in position," he reported, his voice professionally neutral despite the weight of what they were about to do. "All weapons ready and locked on primary targets. Planetary defense grids have detected our presence and are powering up. We're being hailed by their orbital defense command. They're demanding we leave immediately or face destruction." Rebecca took a deep breath, feeling the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. She had spent 20 years in the United Human Space Navy. She had commanded 3 different vessels before being given the Relentless. She had fought pirates, negotiated with alien traders, and explored star systems where no human had ever ventured. But nothing in her career had prepared her for this moment. Nothing could prepare someone for this. She opened a communication channel directly to the planet's surface, broadcasting on all frequencies so that every Zelthian with a radio or communication device would hear her words. Military channels, civilian broadcasts, emergency networks. Everyone would hear this message. "This is Captain Rebecca Hayes of the United Human Space Navy vessel Relentless," she began, her voice steady and clear despite the emotions churning inside her. "I'm going to explain exactly what's going to happen next, and I need everyone on your planet to listen very carefully." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. Somewhere down on that planet, government officials were probably scrambling to respond. Military commanders were likely preparing for battle. But she needed the civilians to hear this too. They deserved to understand what their government had brought down upon them. "You have 72 hours to return every single person who was taken from New Haven Colony. Every single one. We want them alive and unharmed. We want them returned to our custody immediately. No negotiations. No conditions. No delays." Rebecca leaned forward slightly in her chair, her eyes fixed on the planet below. "If you comply with this demand, we will leave your system peacefully. No further action will be taken against your homeworld. We will consider the matter resolved and depart immediately." She let that offer hang in the air for a few seconds before continuing. "But if you refuse, if you harm even one of our people, if you try to use them as hostages or bargaining chips, if you fail to return them within the time limit I've specified." With a gesture, she activated a pre-prepared holographic transmission that would display on every screen planet-wide. The images showed historical footage from Earth. Cities burning during ancient wars. Orbital bombardment demonstrations. The terrible, efficient machinery of human warfare when all restraint was finally removed. Centuries of hard-won experience in the art of destruction. "We are very, very good at devastation," Rebecca said quietly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper but somehow carrying even more weight than if she had been shouting. "We've had thousands of years to perfect it. We've done terrible things to each other throughout our history. We've learned exactly how to break civilizations and crush military forces and reduce entire societies to rubble. We know every method, every technique, every psychological pressure point." She paused again, letting the images speak for themselves. "Please don't make us show you what we've learned. Please don't force us to demonstrate capabilities we would much rather never use again. Return our people. Let them come home. And we will leave in peace." The transmission ended. The holographic displays faded. The communication channel closed with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the suddenly quiet bridge. Her crew sat in silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Everyone on the bridge understood that this wasn't a bluff. The Relentless carried weapons capable of making good on every promise their captain had just made. They also understood that using those weapons would change them all forever. Some things once done could never be undone. Lieutenant Morrison broke the silence first, his voice uncertain. "Captain, do you think they'll actually surrender? Or are they going to force our hand?" Rebecca continued staring at the planet below, watching it rotate peacefully, oblivious to how close it stood to the edge of destruction. "I honestly hope they surrender, Jack. I really do. Because if they don't, we'll have to show them exactly why humanity doesn't make empty threats. And I don't want to become the person who destroys a world, even if they gave me no choice." Emperor Caxthor stood at the center of the ancient throne room, a massive chamber carved from solid stone over 2,000 years ago. The walls bore the scars and marks of countless battles, each one commemorating a victory in the long and bloody history of the Zelthian Empire. Banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, displaying the symbols of conquered worlds and defeated enemies. This room had witnessed the planning of hundreds of successful military campaigns. Today it might witness the end of everything. His war council gathered around the circular strategic table, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of holographic displays showing the current tactical situation. The mood was grim. Everyone present understood that they stood at a crossroads that would determine the fate of their entire civilization. General Vexenar slammed his clawed fist against the table, causing the holographic projections to flicker momentarily. He was old-school military, a warrior who had earned his rank through combat rather than politics. His scales bore the scars of dozens of battles, and his eyes burned with the fire of someone who had never retreated from a fight in his entire life. "We must fight," he declared, his voice echoing off the ancient stone walls. "To surrender to a single ship would shame us forever. Our ancestors conquered 17 star systems. They defeated enemies that outnumbered them 100 to 1. Are we really going to bow down to one vessel just because it destroyed a few fleets? What would our descendants say about us? What would history remember? Admiral Treshkor shook her head slowly, her more seasoned features showing the weight of experience that came with age and wisdom. She had commanded fleets for 40 years and understood warfare not as an abstract concept of honor, but as a brutal calculation of capabilities and consequences. Unlike the general, she had studied the reports from the Crimson Nebula battle extensively. She had watched the recordings multiple times, analyzing every detail of how the human ship had systematically dismantled the Seventh Armada. "Our fleet is destroyed," she countered, her voice calm but firm. 3 entire battle groups. Over 500 warships across all engagements. Thousands of our finest warriors dead. And that one ship did what our enemies couldn't accomplish in centuries of warfare. Pride won't resurrect the dead, General. Honor won't rebuild our fleets. We need to face reality here. Other council members began arguing, their voices rising as the debate grew more heated. Some sided with the general, insisting that Zelthian pride demanded they fight to the last. Others supported the admiral, pointing out that fighting was pointless if it only led to their complete annihilation. The arguments went in circles, each side repeating the same points with increasing volume. Emperor Caxthor sat in silence through it all, his mind racing through impossible calculations. On one side of the scale sat extinction. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that seemed almost magical. If they chose to destroy the Zelthian homeworld, could anyone actually stop them? Their weapons technology was clearly decades, maybe centuries, ahead of anything the galaxy had seen before. On the other side of the scale sat humiliation. The shame of surrendering to a single enemy vessel. The loss of respect from other species. The knowledge that the mighty Zelthian Empire had been brought to its knees by newcomers who had only joined the galactic community 3 years ago. He was still weighing these terrible options, trying to find some third path that might save both his people and their honor, when every light in the throne room suddenly died. The holographic displays vanished. The soft illumination from wall panels went dark. Even the emergency lighting systems failed. The ancient throne room plunged into absolute darkness so complete that Caxthor couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. For a moment, everyone sat in stunned silence. Then voices began rising in confusion and alarm. Officers called out to each other in the darkness. Someone demanded to know what was happening. A younger advisor started to panic, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Then reports started flooding in through personal communication devices that still functioned on battery power. The power failure wasn't limited to the throne room or even the Imperial Palace. It was everywhere. The entire planet had gone dark simultaneously. Every electrical system, every power grid, every energy source had failed at exactly the same instant. Communications networks were down. Defense grids had shut off. Life support systems and orbital stations had switched to emergency batteries that would only last a few hours. Traffic control systems in major cities had failed, causing chaos on the streets. Hospitals were running on backup generators. Food storage facilities were losing refrigeration. Water treatment plants had stopped operating. 8 billion people were suddenly living in a technological dark age, and nobody understood why or how it had happened. There had been no explosions. No electromagnetic pulse weapons. No visible attack of any kind. The power had simply stopped working, as if someone had flipped a switch and turned off an entire planet's infrastructure. Then, cutting through the darkness and confusion, Captain Hayes's voice emerged from the emergency communication systems. These systems were designed to function even during catastrophic failures, powered by independent sources and broadcasting on frequencies that could penetrate almost any interference. Her words reached every Zelthian on the planet simultaneously, from the Emperor in his throne room to farmers in remote villages to workers in underground mining facilities. "This is what mercy looks like," she said, her tone conversational but carrying an undercurrent of absolute certainty. "Your civilization still stands. Your cities remain intact. Your people still breathe. But right now, at this exact moment, you exist only because we allow it. We could have destroyed your power generation permanently. We could have triggered cascading failures in your orbital infrastructure. We could have turned off your life support and let millions die. We chose not to do any of those things." The silence in the throne room was absolute as everyone listened to her words. Even General Vexinar had stopped arguing, his aggressive posture deflating as the reality of their situation became undeniable. "We could have destroyed you," Captain Hayes continued. "Instead, we're giving you a demonstration. A warning. A final chance to make the right decision. Remember that." Exactly 60 seconds after the power failed, it returned. Lights flickered back to life. Holographic displays restored themselves. Communication networks came back online. Defense grids rebooted. Life support systems and orbital stations stabilized. Everything returned to normal function as if nothing had happened. But in that 1 minute of darkness, every single Zelthian understood a terrible truth. They hadn't been fighting a warship. They had been facing a species that had completely mastered the art of total warfare and then consciously chose to exercise restraint. The humans could have killed billions with a thought. Instead, they simply turned off the lights for 60 seconds as a warning. It was more terrifying than any weapon could ever be. Because it meant the humans weren't limited by technology or capability. They were only limited by their own choice to show mercy. And mercy could be withdrawn just as easily as it had been granted. Emperor Caxthor realized in that moment that the debate about honor versus survival was meaningless. There was no honor in forcing your people into extinction over pride. There was no shame in acknowledging that you had encountered a superior force and choosing to protect your civilization rather than sacrifice it for abstract concepts. He stood up slowly, his decision made. Send a message to Captain Hayes. Tell her we accept her terms. All human captives will be returned immediately. General Vexenar started to protest, but the Emperor cut him off with a sharp gesture. This discussion is over. We lost. Not because we fought poorly but because we chose the wrong enemy. We will return their people, pay whatever reparations they demand, and learn from this experience. Our civilization will survive. That's what matters. Meanwhile, Ambassador Velkera received special permission to board the Relentless. She had expected to find a vessel that reflected the brutal efficiency of its combat performance. A war machine, cold and brutal, designed purely for destruction. Instead, she discovered something that surprised her deeply. The corridors of the Relentless hummed with quiet efficiency. Crew members moved with purpose but without the harsh military rigidity she had seen on other warships. The ship was clean and well maintained, but it felt lived in rather than sterile. She passed a common area where off-duty personnel were relaxing, sharing a meal and laughing at some shared joke. One young officer was reading a physical book, an ancient form of entertainment that most species had abandoned centuries ago. These weren't cold-blooded killers. They were just people doing a difficult job, trying to maintain some normalcy while operating so far from home. Captain Rebecca Hayes met her in a small conference room that overlooked the Zelthian homeworld through a large viewport. The captain was younger than Velkera had expected, maybe 40 Earth years old, which translated to perhaps 45 cycles in Galactic Standard Time. But her eyes carried the weight of someone much older. They were tired eyes, eyes that had seen too much and carried burdens that would have broken weaker individuals. You came to negotiate, Rebecca said as Velkera entered. It wasn't phrased as a question, just a simple statement of fact. Actually, I came to understand, Velkera replied honestly, taking a seat across from the human captain. Your people terrify the galaxy now. After what you did to the Zelthian fleets, after what you just demonstrated with the power shutdown, every species in the Council is afraid of humanity. I needed to see for myself what kind of people could do such things. Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was the laugh of someone who had heard a dark joke that only she understood. Good. Maybe they'll think twice before hurting humans again. Maybe next time, they'll actually respond when we ask for help instead of forming committees and scheduling meetings while our people suffer. She stood up from her chair and walked to the large viewport, staring down at the planet below. The cities glittered in the darkness, peaceful and beautiful from orbit. Do you know what it costs, Ambassador? To have the power to destroy an entire civilization and choose not to use it? To hold that kind of capability in your hands and make the conscious decision to show restraint? No, Velkera admitted quietly. I don't think most species understand that burden. Everything, Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. It costs everything. Every day, every hour, you carry the weight of what you could do but choose not to. We're not monsters, Ambassador. We're just tired of being victims. Tired of being the newcomers that other species think they can push around without consequences. She turned back to face Velkera, and the ambassador saw raw emotion in those tired eyes. Pain, anger, determination, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Humans excel at one thing above all else: we survive, Rebecca continued. We've survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. We've survived our own worst impulses and the terrible things we've done to each other. Every atrocity in our history, every genocide, every war we fought against ourselves taught us the same bitter lesson. Unchecked power leads to destruction. So we built checks into our systems. Rules. Laws. Lines we won't cross. Her eyes hardened, and suddenly Velkara understood the expression she had seen. It was the look of someone who had crossed lines they never wanted to cross and would have to live with those choices forever. But when someone crosses our lines? Rebecca asked. When they hurt our people and your precious council does nothing except debate and delay. When they take our civilians as slaves and think we'll just accept it. She paused. Then we become what we have to be. And we're very, very good at it. Because we've spent thousands of years learning how. Below them, on the planet's surface, the Zelthian government transmitted their formal surrender. All human captives would be gathered and returned within 24 hours. Full reparations would be negotiated. The Empire offered its apologies and requested that humanity show the same mercy going forward that they had demonstrated today. Rebecca read the transmission on a small display and nodded slowly. It's done, she said quietly. We can finally go home. The Galactic Council chamber had never seen anything quite like this before. Every available seat was filled. Representatives who normally sent junior diplomats had come in person. Species that rarely attended regular sessions had dispatched their highest-ranking officials. Even the observation galleries high above the main floor were packed with journalists, analysts, and curious observers from dozens of different worlds. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension and anticipation. They were all gathering to witness something that had never happened in the entire 1,000-year history of the Council. Humanity's formal entrance into galactic politics. Not as petitioners seeking membership. Not as junior partners asking for guidance. But as a force that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. Councillor Thexmon stood near the main entrance, adjusting his ceremonial robes and preparing for what he assumed would be a typical diplomatic ceremony. He expected to see human diplomats arrive in formal wear, dressed in whatever passed for official clothing on Earth. Perhaps some military advisors would accompany them, standing respectfully in the background while trained negotiators handled the actual discussions. That was how these things always worked. Protocols existed for a reason. The massive ceremonial doors began to open, their ancient mechanisms groaning under the weight of solid metal that had guarded this chamber for centuries. Every eye in the room turned toward the entrance. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the rustling of clothing and the soft sounds of breathing seemed to fade as everyone waited to see how humanity would present itself. Captain Rebecca Hayes walked through those doors alone, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. She wasn't wearing diplomatic robes or formal civilian clothing. She wore her combat uniform, the same one she had worn during the confrontation with the Zelthian Empire. The insignia of the United Human Space Navy was clearly visible on her shoulder, catching the light as she moved. Her boots, designed for the metal floors of a warship rather than the polished stone of a diplomatic chamber, clicked with each step. The chamber went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that vast space. Delegates stared in shock at this breach of protocol. Some looked offended. Others seemed confused. A few appeared genuinely frightened, recognizing the woman who had brought the Zelthian Empire to its knees. Rebecca walked calmly to the center of the chamber, ignoring the shocked expressions and whispered comments. She had faced down an entire armada. A room full of diplomats didn't intimidate her in the slightest. When she reached the designated speaking position, she turned to face the assembled council members, her posture relaxed but alert. Members of the Galactic Council, she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the enormous chamber without shouting. I'm Captain Rebecca Hayes of the United Human Space Navy. 3 weeks ago, the Zelthian Empire, acting on behalf of certain council members, raided our colony world of New Haven and enslaved 3,000 civilians. Men, women, and children taken from their homes in the middle of the night. She paused, letting those words sink in. Your response was to form a committee. You scheduled meetings. You drafted reports. You debated appropriate procedures while our people suffered in chains. Uncomfortable shifting rippled through the assembled delegates. Some looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Others shifted in their seats, their various appendages moving in ways that indicated distress or embarrassment in their respective species. We don't want your committees, Rebecca continued, her voice remaining calm but gaining an edge of steel. We don't want your lengthy debates or your carefully worded resolutions. We want our people safe. We want fair trade agreements based on mutual benefit. We want open dialogue where all parties are heard. We want mutual respect between species. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. But we will never allow our civilians to be harmed while bureaucrats debate the appropriate diplomatic response. We will not wait for permission to defend ourselves. We will not accept that being newcomers means we must tolerate injustice. With a gesture, she activated a holographic display that materialized in the air above the chamber floor. The images showed human warships that made the Relentless look like a small patrol craft by comparison. Massive vessels bristling with weapons systems that incorporated technology decades beyond what most species possessed. Fleet formations that numbered in the hundreds. Defensive platforms that could protect entire star systems. The Relentless is 40 years old, Rebecca said, her tone conversational now as if she were discussing the weather rather than instruments of war. It's the oldest combat vessel we still operate. We keep it in service for training purposes and for missions where we don't want to risk newer equipment. Would you like to see detailed specifications of what we've built in the last decade? Would you like technical demonstrations of our current military capabilities? Or can we skip all the posturing and threats and move directly to cooperation? The threat wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Every delegate in that chamber understood exactly what she was saying. Humanity had revealed only a fraction of their true military power. The ship that had destroyed multiple Zelthian fleets was considered outdated by human standards. What could their modern vessels accomplish? The choice facing the Council was brutally simple. They could continue treating humanity as ignorant newcomers and face the consequences of that miscalculation. Or they could accept humans as equals and build relationships based on mutual respect rather than condescension. Ambassador Velkera rose slowly from her seat, her movements deliberate and formal. She had spent weeks investigating what happened at New Haven. She had boarded the Relentless and spoken directly with Captain Hayes. She understood something that many other council members had failed to grasp. Humanity wasn't seeking dominance. They were demanding justice and respect. There was a crucial difference between those two goals. I propose that humanity be granted a council seat with full voting rights, Velkera announced, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. Not as newcomers seeking permission to join our community. Not as junior members who must prove themselves worthy. But as equals who have already demonstrated their capabilities and their commitment to protecting their people. The chamber erupted into heated debate. Some delegates immediately supported the proposal, recognizing the practical reality of their situation. Others objected strongly, arguing that humanity hadn't followed proper procedures or demonstrated sufficient understanding of galactic culture. A few tried to propose compromise solutions, suggesting humanity be granted provisional membership with limited voting rights. The debate lasted 3 full hours. Arguments were made and countered. Historical precedents were cited. Legal technicalities were discussed at length. Through it all, Captain Hayes stood patiently in the center of the chamber, neither defending her people nor attacking her critics. She simply waited, her presence a constant reminder of what humanity represented. Finally, the vote was called. The electronic tally appeared on displays throughout the chamber. It was close, far closer than anyone expected. But when the final count appeared, humanity had been granted their seat. They were now full members of the Galactic Council with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. As the session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Velkera approached Rebecca privately. The two women walked together toward a quiet alcove where they could speak without being overheard by the numerous journalists and observers who were trying to get statements. You terrified them into acceptance, Velkera said quietly, her tone neither approving nor disapproving. Simply stating a fact. Was that your plan from the beginning? To force them to grant you membership through fear? Rebecca shook her head slowly, genuine surprise showing on her face. No. Honestly, we never planned any of this. We didn't set out to terrify anyone or force ourselves into galactic politics. We just wanted our people home. We wanted the civilians who were taken from New Haven to be returned safely to their families. That was the entire goal of this mission. She paused, looking back at the now mostly empty chamber. But if the fear and respect we've earned keeps other species from hurting humans in the future? If it makes them think twice before they dismiss our concerns or ignore our diplomatic requests? She shrugged slightly. Then I can live with that outcome. I'd rather be feared and respected than liked and victimized. Back aboard the Relentless, the crew was preparing for their long journey home. The ship hummed with activity as various systems were checked and rechecked before departure. Supply manifests were reviewed. Navigation coordinates were calculated and verified. All the routine tasks that happened before any major voyage were being completed with practiced efficiency. Lieutenant Jack Morrison approached Captain Hayes on the bridge, carrying a data pad filled with incoming messages. Captain, you're not going to believe the communications we're receiving. We've got messages from over a dozen different species. Trade proposals. Defense pact offers. cultural exchange programs, scientific collaboration requests. Everyone suddenly wants to be humanity's friend. Rebecca smiled slightly, a tired but genuine expression. Funny how respect follows strength, isn't it? When we were just peaceful newcomers asking nicely for cooperation, we were ignored or dismissed. Now that we've demonstrated we won't tolerate being pushed around, suddenly everyone wants to negotiate. It's cynical, Morrison observed, but probably accurate. One more thing, ma'am, he continued, scrolling through his data pad. Earth Command is asking for a mission status update. What should I tell them? Mission accomplished. Rebecca walked to the main viewport, staring out at the stars that surrounded them. Each point of light represented a sun, possibly with planets, possibly with civilizations. Out there somewhere was Earth, their home world, where people were waiting to hear what had happened. Waiting to learn if their loved ones who had been taken would be coming home. She thought about everything that had happened over the past weeks. The battles fought. The lives lost on both sides. The demonstration of power that had brought an empire to its knees. The political maneuvering in the council chamber. All the violence and diplomacy and fear and hope that had brought them to this moment. Tell them we came in war, Rebecca said quietly, her voice reflective. Tell them we brought our weapons and our anger and our determination to retrieve our people by any means necessary. But tell them we're leaving in peace. We got what we came for. The New Haven civilians are safe and coming home. We secured humanity's place in the galactic community. And we did it without destroying anyone who didn't force our hand. She paused, then added, and make sure they understand that last part. That peace is exactly what we prefer. We have the capability for war. We demonstrated that beyond any doubt. But we'd much rather build friendships and trade agreements than fight battles. Morrison nodded and began composing the message. Around them, the bridge crew completed their pre-departure checklist. All systems showed green. The ship was ready to go home. Navigation, Rebecca ordered, settling into her command chair. Set course for Earth. Maximum sustainable speed. Let's go home. The relentless, powerful engines engaged, and the ship began accelerating toward the point where it would jump to faster-than-light travel. Within minutes, they made the transition, and the stars stretched into lines of light as the warship vanished from normal space. Behind them, they left a galaxy that had been fundamentally and forever changed. Humanity had announced themselves to the wider universe not with carefully crafted speeches or diplomatic niceties, but with the most powerful message imaginable. They had demonstrated the capability to destroy their enemies utterly and completely. And then, when victory was assured, they had chosen to show mercy instead. That choice, that conscious decision to exercise restraint when they had the power to do otherwise, was more terrifying and more impressive than any weapon humanity could have possibly built. Because it meant that humans weren't simply powerful. They were in control of that power. They knew when to use it and, more importantly, when not to use it. Other species in the galaxy had advanced weapons. Many civilizations possessed technology capable of destroying worlds. But very few had demonstrated the wisdom and discipline to hold that power in check when it would have been easier to simply unleash destruction. In the end, humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons or even their tactical brilliance. It was their choice to be better than their worst impulses. To show mercy when vengeance would have been easier. To build peace when war was within their grasp. And that was a lesson the galaxy would not soon forget.